Hello, welcome to Planet Hex. I am Andrew Horn. This is the show where I talk about lots of geeky things to do with the geek lifestyle. So, you know, it covers comics, movies, video games, board games, card games, anime, retro toys, collectibles, and all kinds of other stuff. So, on this episode, I figured it was about time I started talking about the big subjects, and I'm talking 80s toys. Yeah, I've been watching a heck of a lot of Retro Rick, Ed's Retro Geek Out, Toy Galaxy, Pixel Dan, things like that, and I want to get in on that action. I want to share with you my love for the 80s toy lines that were huge at the time in a list I like to call 10 toy lines that made my 80s childhood epic. Now, disclaimer before we go any further, this list does not contain any Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. Sorry Turtles fans, it's just that they weren't really available until the start of the 90s over here in any great quantity, so I didn't get my hands on any until about 1990, 91, I think it was 1990. And even then I had to get it from another country, you know. Turtles were so big, they were really hard to get by, really hard to come by at the time. So this is my top 10 list. There are some shout outs I will make before we go on. Lines like Boglins, Battle Beasts, Starcom, Zoids, and things like that didn't quite make my top 10 but did help me along the way, having an awesome 80s childhood. I had a great time with it. I was born at the back end of the 70s, very end of the 1970s, and as such I was perfectly placed to really pick up on all the big toy lines that came built in with their cartoon series. So let's have a look at my top 10. They're sort of in order. The top one is certainly in order. My top 10 80s toy lines that made my childhood seriously epic. The GoBots line ran from 1983 to 1987, even making it into cinemas. While they're now remembered as the line of transforming robots that weren't Transformers, the GoBots were still a lot of fun as a kid. Their robot forms were never that impressive, but their vehicle forms were often very accurate. They were also way smaller than most Transformers, and as such they fit great in small hands. As my childhood wore on, I found another use for the GoBots toys as backup troops for their way more successful rivals. The GoBots spin-off, the Rock Lords, were a nice addition to the line, but I don't think my mother has ever forgiven me for making us sit through the Rock Lords movie in the 80s. Sorry, Mum. Star Wars so low in the list? Look, I loved Star Wars and I still do. Return of the Jedi was even the first film I saw at the cinema. Sadly, the toys were quickly replaced in my affections by lines that had more interactivity. Those classic figures, ships and playsets will always make me think of long hours in my bedroom, with stormtroopers laying siege to a rebel base before Luke Skywalker would arrive in his X-Wing fighter to save the day. The AT-AT and the Millennium Falcon were firm favourites in my toy haven, as it was always satisfying to have figures piloting them. It always worked well if you could put your figures into a vehicle and have them fly around just like in the movie. I think that the total domination and saturation of Star Wars at the time resulted in some kids looking elsewhere for their toy figs, and man, at the time, we were spoiled for choice. Thundercats! Ho! The original wave of Thundercats toys that arrived in the wake of the hugely popular animated series were oversized, brightly coloured and extremely accurate depictions of their cartoon counterparts. The sheer size of these figures, coupled with features like being able to make Lionel and Mumra's eyes light up via a battery pack ring that you would stick in the back, made them really attractive to a young fan like me. However, while the figures and playsets were awesome, the greatest toy for me from that line was the Sword of Omen's toy itself. I mean, it didn't grow in size when you called out the Thundercats cry or anything like that, but the Eye of Thundera did light up, giving it a heck of a lot of playability. Supernaturals. The mid-80s saw an explosion of interest in pretty much anything that had a hologram on it, and the Supernaturals, for a brief time anyway, rode that wave in style. This line of action figures from Tonka boasted detailed holograms instead of a face and torso, which you could reveal by pulling off the armour. Each of them showed a regular character and a scary alternate version of them. This was a pretty short-lived toy line, which is a shame as I thought they had a lot of potential. Sadly, the hologram craze of the 80s didn't last long enough for them to really build the fan base they needed.
There was a comic here in the UK, but with no animated series to maintain interest in the line, it soon faded into obscurity. I'd imagine some parents were sort of pleased about that really, as maybe some of those hologram images were just a bit too gruesome for kids' toy box. But hey, kids love gruesome. Power Extreme! The Centurions toy line and accompanying cartoon did a lot of things right. Here was a property where the main characters could attach all manner of suits, jetpacks, weaponry and other gadgets to their costumes, thanks to the plug-in style attachments built into the figures themselves. This made it possible to rearrange their accessories however you wanted to amongst the three Centurions or even the bad guys. Looking back now, I see the toys were way better than the cartoon was. The figures were oversized, more like the size of the classic Action Man figures, but way more robust. There was an enormous amount of fun to be had with the toys and the associated extras that were collected for them, but despite the ingenuity of the line, it couldn't maintain sales and was soon discontinued. Good memories though. Mask! I can't do the theme tune, I wish I could, I can't sing that high anymore. Kicking off in 1985, the Mask cartoon and toy line ticked a lot of boxes in terms of what kids wanted to play with. Vehicles that could transform into something else? Check. A cool base? Check. Helmets with special powers? Check. An awesome theme tune? Hell yes. It was like a mashup of G.I. Joe and Transformers in a way, and for a while we kids loved it. The character figures may have been pretty small, which made it easy to lose their helmets, but the ingenious vehicles were so fun it was ridiculous. For toys big and small, there was also something to suit a lot of budgets, meaning that Mask found its way into many a toy box, and definitely mine. My favourite of the toy line was Hurricane, a turquoise Chevy that could transform into a six-wheeled assault tank. Even its pilot, Hondo McClane, had a suit that screamed 80s awesomeness. With a cartoon that ran to 75 episodes over 2 seasons and one of the most iconic toy ranges of the era, there was plenty to love with Mask. Visionaries, Knights of the Magical Light! Always want to sing that. The Visionaries mix fantasy action figures and holograms in a very different way to how the Supernaturals had done it. Here were groups of spectral knights and darkling lords doing battle in a science fantasy universe that felt like masters of the universe with better armour, using their powers to become the supernatural beings shown in their holographic chest plates, or doing battle with the magical totems in their staffs. The Visionaries were a brief but powerful entry into our toy consciousness. Their cartoon may have only lasted 13 episodes, but in my opinion it perfectly tapped into the mid-80s interest in science fantasy, basically sci-fi fantasy elements, that drove so many stories at the time. The hologram gimmick which was relied on looked amazing, but as interest in holograms diminished, Visionaries found themselves cancelled. They can still be found in various states on eBay, and I'm very tempted indeed. Okay, on to the Transformers. Yep, they're number 3. For a long time, the Transformers would have been my number 1 choice for the toy line that made my 80s childhood awesome, and with good reason. Importing Japanese toy lines from Takara's Diaclone and Microman properties and smashing them together into one shared universe turned out to be a genius move on the part of Hasbro, helped along massively by an enormously popular cartoon series and of course the animated movie. Transformers toys flew off the shelves in their millions. The longevity of the line was helped by its ability to evolve and try out new things, and along the way we had lines like the Headmasters, Power Masters, Target Masters, Pretenders and more, seeing the line through the 80s, and lines like Beast Wars and so on through the 90s and up to the present day with things like Robots in Disguise and such like. There's loads of them around now. The live action movies may not have been perfect, apart from Bumblebee, it has to be said. But it also has to be said that aside from Star Wars, Transformers is really the only property that's properly remained in the public eye. My favourites of those original toys would always be the obvious G1 Optimus Prime, and the rather less obvious Scorponok, an enormous Decepticon triple changer. Autobots, roll out. It's impossible to talk about 80s toys without covering the juggernaut that was Masters of the Universe, and the toy line from Mattel. Assisted by an admittedly patchy but iconic cartoon series that often reused animations to save time and money, the toy line was one of the most exciting things to happen to a kid at the time. The figures were sturdy and could take a real beating from their foes. Playsets may never have looked exactly like their cartoon counterparts, but they were still a ton of fun. Sure, the line got weird with toys like Mossman, Fisto and Snout Spout, but it's easy to see why an entire generation of kids wanted to get their hands on these toys. Eventually the range faded away, and the repeated attempts to bring it back have never really gelled. Looking at you, the new adventures of He-Man. Some toys from the line, such as the Eternia playset or the so-called Wonder Bread He-Man, have become toy enthusiast holy grails around the world. While broke during the dark days of 2020, I must admit I sold my Masters of the Universe collection in its entirety. And while I do regret it, I'm glad those toys went to a collector who would really appreciate it. The battles of He-Man and Skeletor raged in bedrooms across the world for a while, and quite rightly so. Those toys were amazing. My personal number one toy line of the 80s is the toy range based on the real Ghostbusters, a cartoon series based on the 1984 masterpiece of a movie. While in my opinion the movie is perfect, it was the cartoon that really connected with me. The characters were exaggerated, the cartoon ghosts were way crazier than live action effects could manage at the time, and the scripts expected more from their young viewers than a lot of other animated shows at the time. My favourite episode, incidentally, was Knock Knock, written by Babylon 5 creator J. Michael Straczynski, in which the Ghostbusters battled possessed trains and had to visit a dark netherworld to do battle with what seemed to be something like a living apocalypse. God, I love that episode. Toys were an ingenious attempt at translating all of the craziness to plastic. Sure, the proton beams that stuck out of the figures were annoying, the Stay Puft Marshmallow Man was the wrong size, and the range got seriously weird towards the end of its production, but the creativity in those toys ensured hours of playtime. Ghost toys became ever more ridiculous, as did the costumes and action features of Egon, Peter, Winston and Ray themselves, but I loved them all dearly. Real Ghostbusters were, by far, the toy line that contributed the most to making my 80s childhood epic.
So there you go. In all honesty, that is the top 10 toy lines that made my 80s childhood epic. I really appreciate you watching it. I hope you've enjoyed this. I hope it's brought back some memories for old-timers like myself, or it's made more recent collectors and enthusiasts check some stuff out they may not be that familiar with. I know it's not the same list as everyone else would have. Everyone has their own personal taste, but this has been my top 10 toy lines that made my 80s childhood epic. Thank you ever so much for watching. If you like this sort of content, I'm more than happy to put more retro gear out for you here on the channel very soon. Please like and subscribe, and remember to hit the notification bell as well, so you don't miss out on any of my videos about retro goodness, movies, games, and my fiction. There's always something new coming. Thank you ever so much for watching Planet Hex. I'll catch you next time.
Thank you for watching. Please like, share and subscribe.